Hello everyone and welcome back to our virtual Mishnah Berurah share. We're holding in Mishnah Berurah Chelik Vav. We're going to be learning today in Yirtzeh Hashem Dav Vav Amid Beis. We are continuing to learn halachos Chol HaMoed, and we pick up today at the bottom line of the Shulchan Aruch on Dav Vav Amid Aleph with a brand new Siman Taf Kuf Lamid Vav. Kol Tzarchei Behema, all of the needs of an animal. Mutar la'asaysay b'chol HaMoed, you are allowed to perform them on Chol HaMoed. Ubay dalet seifim, and here in this siman we have 4 seifim. Says the Mechaber in Sif Aleph, Mi shetzarch lirkayv b'moed l'tayel. If somebody needs to ride an animal on Chol HaMoed in order to go out l'tayel, what does l'tayel mean? Well, Rashi in Moed Katan says that the word l'tayel means lashut and lirois ba'olam. It means to go take a nice pleasant walk, to go for a nice stroll on the countryside, go out and see the world. Really, l'tayel means you're going out for a pleasure trip. So, says the Mechaber, Misha tzarech lirkayv b'moed l'tayel. If somebody needs to go ride an animal in order to go out for this pleasure trip, so he's traveling for a pleasure trip on Chol HaMoed, or he's doing some other kind of riding an animal that's l'tzarech hamoed. Maybe he has to go ride an animal to go to the to go out to the general store and buy flour to make bread for Chol HaMoed. But he needs to go ride l'tzarech hamoed. So far the Mechaber gave me l'tayel, which is to go on a pleasure trip, or for another tzarech hamoed. Now very clearly the Mechaber is equating l'tayel and l'tzarech hamoed. So going out for a pleasure trip on Chol HaMoed is considered a tzarech hamoed. It's one of the things that you do on the moed. Okay, so l'tayel is l'tzarech hamoed. V'lo nisa laleches baraglov. The Mechaber continues and he says, this person has a need to go ride, and this is not a trip that he's accustomed to make by foot. So he has to go to the store, let's say, to purchase his flour, l'tzarech hamoed, to go make bread on Chol HaMoed, and it's not a trip that he would generally do walking. This is something that he would normally ride. So he has a genuine tzarech hamoed where he is required to ride an animal, and it's a trip that he would always ride. It's not a trip that he would walk. In such a case, says the Mechaber, Yachal, and we turn to Vav Amid Beis, Yachal litel tziparnei hasus, he's allowed to go ahead and trim the hooves of the horse. If it's a locale where the horses are not accustomed to being shoed, if they don't put horseshoes on the horse, and instead the horse goes around on its hooves, but sometimes you have to trim the hooves to make them nice and level so that the animal can find his balance properly. You're allowed to do that, even though trimming the hooves of the horse would involve performing the melachah of geizes. So, still in all, even though it's a melachah, you're allowed to do this on Chol HaMoed. Ulesakein, and you're also allowed to repair, and over here we're going to see the Mishnah Berurah puts in the words, Ulesakein barzilov. It says over here in our text, Ulesakein baraglov, to fix his feet. The Mishnah Berurah says the proper text is Ulesakein barzilov. You can make the horseshoes, and you could put the horseshoes onto the animal. This would also involve melachah. Making the horseshoes would be tikkun maneh. Probably affixing them to the animal, I would think, is also tikkun maneh. I think. V'ha'ukaf, you could repair the saddle, v'haresen, or the bit of the animal. V'chol tzarchei rechiva. You could do all of the other requirements that are necessary to get the animal ready for riding. Whatever is required for you to do to ride this animal, even though it involves melachah, you're allowed to do it on Chol HaMoed, or belvad shelo yechaven melachtoi b'moed. So long as it's not something that you could have done before Yom Tov, and you just decided, I'm not going to do it now before Yom Tov, I'll do it on Chol HaMoed. I remember learning Dirshu Mishnah Berurah Siman Taf Kuf Lamid Vav. I remember learning you're allowed to do tzarchei rechiva on Chol HaMoed. If it's tzarech hamoed, I'll do it on Chol HaMoed. No, that you're not allowed to do. If it's something that you can do before the Moed, do it before the Moed. But if it was you definitely shouldn't plan that I'm going to do it on Chol HaMoed. But if you didn't do it before the Moed, and now you have to do it on Chol HaMoed, all of these things you're allowed to do. And I just want to also read the Ramah here, Haggah, Umuter lirkaiv b'mayid afilu me'ir le'ir afilu b'chinam. And as far as the riding itself, see, so far over here in the Mechaber, we're covering really two things. One is that you're allowed to ride an animal on Chol HaMoed. On the Moed, on Yom Tov itself, on Shabbos and on Yom Tov, you're not allowed to ride an animal. Why not? Because the Chazal made a takana that we're afraid if you're going to ride an animal on Shabbos or Yom Tov, you might come to break a branch off of a tree to use it as a switch, to use it as something to hit the animal, to make the animal go. And breaking the branch off the tree, that would be the melachah of toilesh. So the Chazal made a takana, and they said you're not allowed to ride an animal on Shabbos or Yom Tov. Really, there's no melachah involved in riding the animal itself. The possible isser that you would think of that might be involved in riding an animal would be the isser of mechamer. Mechamer is when you have an animal that's carrying a load and you make an animal that's carrying a load go. So you lead an animal that's carrying a load, that's an isser of mechamer, and that's an isser of shvisas behemtoi. You are required on Shabbos for sure, on Yom Tov we had it's a machlokes. On Shabbos for sure, you have a chiyuv of shvisas behemtoi. Your animal has to rest. You're not allowed to make your animal do work. So there's a lav of mechamer. There's an isser of leading an animal with a load. But riding an animal is not the isser of mechamer. Because the animal itself, we have a rule, chai noisei es atzmai. The animal is not carrying a load. The animal is a bal chai. He's noisei es atzmai, and you're a bal chai. You're a living animal, a living creation. So when you ride on the animal, we don't say that the animal is carrying you and therefore is carrying a load. Instead, we say chai noisei es atzmai. You're a Baruch Hashem living. You carry yourself. So there's no isser of mechamer. There's no isser daraisa involved. There's no melachah involved in riding an animal. On Chol HaMoed, you're allowed to ride an animal. On Shabbos and on Yom Tov, we have the Issa D'Rabbanan because you might come to break off a branch. But on Chol HaMoed, we don't have that Issa D'Rabbanan. So on Chol HaMoed, you're allowed to ride an animal. And this Ramah just told me here, Umuter lirkaiv b'mayid afilu me'ir le'ir afilu b'chinam. You're allowed to ride from one city to another for no purpose at all. You're not doing it with Tzarech HaMoed. There's no real Tzarech HaMoed over here. But you're allowed to ride an animal on Chol HaMoed. But the other halacha that we're seeing here is that not only are you allowed to ride an animal, that you're allowed to do even bechinam. That you're allowed to do for no purpose at all. If you have a Tzarech HaMoed, and the Mechaber told us that a Tzarech HaMoed includes l'tayel, you're just going on a pleasure trip, then not only are you allowed to ride an animal, you're also allowed to do melachah that's necessary in order to be able to ride. So you need to put horseshoes on the animal, you're allowed to. You need to trim the animal's hooves, you're allowed to. You need to repair the animal's bit and put on the animal's bit. All of these things, they involve melachah and they involve tircha, but you're allowed to do all of them on Chol HaMoed because you're riding for a Tzarech HaMoed. And the Ramah says, V'chei noagu, and this is the minig, Elo she'asar l'sakein kol tzarchei ha'rechiva, im ein ha'roichiv l'tzarchei l'tayel. Says the Ramah, if you're doing the riding for no purpose whatsoever, if you don't have a Tzarech HaMoed, then you're allowed to ride, but you're not allowed to do melachah that has anything to do with preparing for the riding. So if you're riding for nothing, you're allowed to ride, but you're not allowed to do the horseshoes, you're not allowed to trim the hooves, you're not allowed to do any malacha, you're not allowed to do. If you're riding for a Tzarech HaMoed, then you're even allowed to do malacha. Okay, now let's take a look over here at the Mishnah Berurah, and then we're going to see some very practical applications for us, even though we, generally speaking, don't ride horses. Says the Mishnah Berurah over here, back on Vav and Aleph, Ois Katan Aleph. So the Mechaber said, Misha tzarech lirkav b'mayid l'tayel. Says the Mishnah Berurah, V'hu adin lirois penei chaveroi. Another case where you're allowed to ride and you're allowed to do malacha to facilitate the riding. would be if you're going to visit a friend. And we had this concept already earlier, that visiting a friend, visiting a relative is considered a tzarich mitzvah. So over here, this is considered a tzarich mitzvah, it's considered a tzarich HaMoed, and therefore you're allowed to do melachah. But let's say you have a business opportunity. So you want to go on your horse and you want to go ride over to the next town for some business opportunity to make money. But that's not a tzarich HaMoed. In that case, mutter lirkayv, that falls under the category of when you're allowed to ride, avalo yisakin tzarich rechiva, but you're not allowed to do any melachah in order to facilitate the riding. That's like the halacha that we saw from the Ramah on Amid Beis, which is, if you're riding for nothing, you're allowed to ride, but you're not allowed to do any malacha to facilitate the riding. So too, if you're riding for a business opportunity to make money that's not l'tzarech HaMoed, yes, you're allowed to ride, but you're not allowed to do any malacha to facilitate the riding. But again, I just want to point out that we see here that l'tayel, to go on a pleasure trip, and I'm going to discuss this a little bit more, to go on a pleasure trip is considered a tzarech HaMoed. And he brings down to the Pri Megadim, Vayin Shamoed. Okay, now we go to Ice Cotton Base. L'tzarech HaMoed, or you're doing some other riding, that's l'tzarech HaMoed. You have to go to the store to buy flour. V'lo nisa laleches baraglov, and you're not accustomed to doing this trip by foot. Avol shaloi l'tzarech HaMoed, but if you're riding for no tzarech HaMoed, like the Ramah on the base, or let's say you do have a tzarech HaMoed where you have to go somewhere, but shalamad laleches baraglov, but it's something that you're accustomed to doing by foot. You have to go down the block to the grocery store, and you usually walk to the grocery store. So then what are you riding for? So then the Chavetz Chaim says, Einay mutter rak harechiva. So yes, if you decide that you want to ride to the grocery store instead of walking to the grocery store, again, the rechiva, the riding, is mutter, just like the rechiva that's for no purpose at all. The rechiva is mutter, avaloi l'sakin sarchi rechiva. But you're not allowed to do any malacha to facilitate the riding. So you're not allowed to trim the hooves. You're not allowed to put on the horseshoes. Ice Cotton Gimel, the Mechaber gave cases of malacha that facilitates the rechiva. One was ulasaken baraglov, which literally means to work on the animal's feet. Says the Chavetz Chaim Tzarech Loimar, the text over here should read ulasaken barzilov, to prepare or repair and install the horseshoes. V'keinu batfus harishain, and indeed an original printing of the Shulchan Aruch, that is the text. The proper text is ulasaken barzilov. Now the Chavetz Chaim points out this that you're allowed to use to put on the horseshoes and repair the horseshoes. V'davka b'medinoi she'avana mitzuyim sham, that's only true in the locale where the roads are stony. Ve'ena behemois yichaylos lelech b'loi barzilim, and therefore the horse, the animals, cannot go without the horseshoes. Avol b'mekaimoi she'ha'afar tichuach, however in locales where the dirt is soft and not stony, ve'en avana mitzuyim sham, and you don't have a lot of rocks, ve'en regilim sham lasois barzilim, and in those locales they're not accustomed to using metal horseshoes on the animals, Asr. In that case it would be Asr, because then it's not considered a tzarech HaMoed. The whole reason this is mutter is because it's a melachah that's being done l'tzarech HaMoed. But if there's no real tzarech HaMoed, it's not mutter. Then we had the Ramah who said, mutter lirkayv, you're allowed to ride even bechinam, and even for no reason at all. And over here the Chavetz Chaim explains, the berechiva leka shum malacha, because like I explained, there is no malacha involved in riding an animal. The only reason riding an animal is asur on Shabbos or Yom Tov is because of the takanas chazal, lest you come to break a branch off a tree. But it doesn't involve any malacha. So riding for no purpose whatsoever is completely mutter on the Chol HaMoed. The question is doing malacha to facilitate the riding. So that's only if you have a bona fide tzarech HaMoed. If you don't have a tzarech HaMoed, you're not allowed to do it. Continues the Mishnah Berurah here, nice cut and dalet. Ve'emuter lisa ba'agola bechinam. How about to ride in a wagon that's being drawn by an animal on Chol HaMoed for no reason at all? Are you allowed to do that? And the shaila that's involved in that is something that I spoke about earlier, which is the isser of mechamer. I told you that there's no isser malacha in riding an animal because the Isser of Mechamer does not apply. Because if you're riding an animal, that does not constitute the animal carrying a load. But if you're sitting in a wagon and the horse is pulling a wagon, now the horse is pulling a load. Oh, so now you're going to get involved in a shaila of Mechamer and a shaila of, is there an Isser of Shvisas, is there a Tzivui, is there a mitzvah of Shvisas Behemtai on Yom Tiv, or is there not? So over here, the Chavetz Chaim sends us to this lengthy Biur Halacha, Dibra Maschel Mutter Lirkaiv, which I'm not going to go into, but it is a very interesting Biur Halacha. Ayin Biur Halacha. Okay, now, very interesting. We see over here, in the beginning of Sif Aleph, the Mechaber said that you're allowed to ride and you're allowed to do melachah to facilitate riding if you're doing it l'tayel. And I told you that l'tayel means that you're simply doing it for pleasure. That's what l'tayel is. L'tayel is to go for a spazier, to go for a leisurely stroll. I think the lashon of Rashi, I have the lashon of Rashi here, the Ferish. Rashi says in Moed Katan that l'tayel means lashut ba'olam v'leroisai, to go out and see the world. So it's going, you're going to the park. You're going out, it's Sukkot, it's the fall, and you want to go to the park and you want to see the beautiful trees changing colors. You want to celebrate the Neflais HaBoirei. So that's l'tayel. And we said that l'tayel is considered a Cho HaMoed. And therefore, not only are you allowed to ride, but you're also allowed to do melachah. You're allowed to do mamish melachah in order to facilitate the riding. You're allowed to do geizes. You're allowed to trim the hooves of the horse. Then on Amid Beis, the Ramah saw necessary to tell me, Umutter lirkaiv b'mayid afilu me'ir le'ir afilu b'chinam. You're allowed to ride b'chinam. You're allowed to ride for nothing. Well, what does that mean for nothing? If somebody is riding, what is he doing it for? Is it less than l'tayel? Is it not l'tayel? If somebody decided to get on the horse and ride, what does it mean that he did it totally, utterly b'chinam? Even if he didn't have to go anywhere, so I guess he was bored and he needed something to do, so he decided, I'm going to go out for a ride. Isn't that b'chinam? Isn't that l'tayel? So what's the difference over here between what the Mechaber told me, that you're allowed to go l'tayel, and if you're going l'tayel, you're even allowed to do melachah, and then the Ramah that says that you're allowed to ride b'chinam, but if you're riding b'chinam, you're not allowed to do melachah. What is this level of riding which is b'chinam that is not l'tayel? Now this bothered me when I learned this sif, and I'm not the first one to ask this kasha. The Aruch HaShulchan asks the kasha. And the Aruch HaShulchan's answer is, he says that l'tayel, his words are very interesting. His words are that l'tayel, I wrote it down here somewhere, yeah. L'tayel, oh, come on. Thought I wrote it down. Oh, yeah, here it is. I wrote it down in Amud Aleph. L'tayel is bahachana, with preparation, v'halichasai benachas, and you're going in a nice, slow fashion. And if I'm understanding the Aruch HaShulchan properly, I think what the Aruch HaShulchan means that l'tayel, a tiyul, what it means to go out l'tayel is like I told you. I'm going out to the park. I planned this. I'm going on a trip. I'm going out to the park to go stroll down the path and look at the beautiful trees. It's bahachana. I'm doing it with preparation. There was a conscious decision that I'm going out for a tiyul, for a pleasure stroll or a pleasure ride, and I'm doing it benachas. I'm doing it slowly. Then I think the Aruch HaShulchan is saying there's another level, which is the level of the Ramah. The level of Ramah is b'chinam. I'm doing it for no reason whatsoever. I'm bored stiff. I can't sit in the house anymore. I'm going out for a ride. But I'm not looking at the trees and I'm not going slow. I'm just riding. And in my head, I'm thinking about this and I'm thinking about that. That's called b'chinam. That's not a tiyul. And that's not a tainug. That's not a pleasure. And that's not called a Cho HaMoed. And since it's not called a Tzarech HaMoed, you're allowed to do the riding because there's no Isser involved in doing the riding. But for that, you're not allowed to do melachah. That's the way I understand the Aruch HaShulchan. Then I saw a very interesting footnote in the Dirshu, which puzzled me at first, but now it gives me some food for thought based on this conversation. On Vav Amud Aleph, in Dirshu footnote number 1, he brings down a psak for Reb Nissen Karelitz. He asks, are you allowed to repair a child's bicycle on Chol HaMoed? If you want to repair a child's bicycle on Chol HaMoed, are you allowed to? Says, he brings down in for Reb Nissen Karelitz, Das Again Reb Nissen Karelitz, now Zatzal, Sha'asa l'sakdem, you're not allowed to repair them, afilu b'maisa hedyet, even if the repair is a maisa hedyet, it's not something that takes a professional. Kevan shamatarasam hirak l'tainug, because the purpose of riding this bike is only for pleasure. It's only for a pleasure ride. Ve'in mishtamshim behem kidei lahagia l'makam rachik. It's not something which is used for transportation. He's not getting on the bike to go ride it for transportation. So what's Reb Nissen Karelitz saying over here? What Reb Nissen Karelitz seems to be saying is that this halacha that we have here, that you're allowed to do repair, you're allowed to do melachah in order to facilitate riding. When are you allowed to do that? You're allowed to do that when you need transportation for a Tzarech HaMoed. If you want to go to the park to see the beautiful trees, but in order to go on your Chol HaMoed trip, it's 6 miles away. You want to go out to the park where it's all beautiful. On your block, there aren't any beautiful trees. So you got to go out to the park. The park is 6 miles away. So now I need transportation to the park. So I got to ride my animal. So I need transportation to go on my tiyul. In that case, says the Mechaber, you're allowed to do the riding, of course, and you're also allowed to do melachah. You're also allowed to trim the hooves and fix the horseshoes. But the shaila of the bike is a different shaila. The shaila of the bike is, you don't need the transportation of the bike for a Tzarech HaMoed. You're not asking me a shaila, can I fix my bike because I need to go to the store? I don't have a car. The store is a mile away, and I usually ride my bike to the store. For that would be okay. So you're doing rechiva, you need transportation, you need to do melachah to facilitate the transportation. It's a tzarech hamoyed, I'm going to the store to buy flour. That, Reb Nissen Karelitz, I believe, would say is mutter. Why not? That's just like fixing the horseshoes, or trimming the nails, trimming the hooves on the horse. But that's not the shaila over here by the child's bike. The shaila by the child's bike is, I don't need transportation. The kid wants to go bike riding. He wants to go riding around the block. For that, Reb Nissen Karelitz says, you're not allowed to go ahead and do the melachah. Now, why not? Why don't you say that is the tiyul? That is the tainug. That is the tzarech hamayid. Just riding. So I'm not going to put words into Reb Nissen Karelitz's mouth, chas v'chalila. It doesn't say this in the footnote over here in the Dirshu. They don't answer this. But I'm wondering if what Reb Nissen Karelitz was saying is, that's the difference between the Mechaber on Amud Aleph and the Ramah on Amud Beis. I have a funny feeling that the way Reb Nissen Karelitz understood this, I wanted to run it by another Pesach. I didn't have a chance. I couldn't get a hold of him this morning. I have a funny feeling that the way Reb Nissen Karelitz understood the Mechaber was, when are you allowed to do melachah to facilitate rechiva, to facilitate riding on Yom Tov? That's when you need transportation for tzarech hamayid, not when the riding itself is the tiyul. If the riding itself is the tiyul, so don't do that. Do something else. Go for a walk. Don't ride. Go for a walk instead. But if I need it for my transportation, if I need to get to the park and the park is 6 miles away, to facilitate transportation l'tzarech hamayid, that's when the Mechaber says you're allowed to do melachah. On Amud Beis, the Ramah is coming to tell you, if you're doing the riding bechinam, you're not doing the riding for transportation. You don't need transportation. You're just bored, so you're going for a joyride. So then the riding is not for transportation. It's only bechinam. It's for nothing. Now you want to elevate that bechinam to a tiyul. You want to call that tiyul. Could be that the Ramah is telling you that that's not called tiyul. And that's what Reb Nissen Karelitz is saying. That's not called a tiyul. Don't go ahead and do a joyride. Go for a walk instead. And don't have the need to do melachah. The need is only if I need transportation. Then I'm allowed to do the melachah. Okay. That's what I had this kasha between the Mechaber and the Ramah, and I saw the Aruch HaShulchan, but then I saw this Reb Nissen Karelitz, so I'm wondering if that's reading between the lines. That's what Reb Nissen Karelitz is saying. Okay. Now we go to Sif Beis. Very interesting. Says the Mechaber, Mutter lisroi kasus. You're allowed to card or comb, brush down the horse, kedei liyapaisai, in order to make it look nicer. So you're washing your car. That's what you're doing. You want to go for a ride on the horse, and we said you're allowed to ride the horse. But the horse is looking a bit, what's that word that they use by horses? I'm going to pronounce it wrong, which I hate doing when I'm doing it in front of the whole world. Mangy or mangy. I'm not sure if that G is a hard G or a soft G. M-A-N-G-Y. So the horse is looking a bit dumpy, and you want to go ahead and you want to brush down the horse, which makes it nice and glossy and clean and shiny. Says the Mechaber, you're allowed to do this on Yom Tov. Now, there even could be a melachah involved. Let's take a look at the Mishnah Berurah. It says the Mishnah Berurah is katneli apaisai, tehu bechlal tzarchei rechiva. This is part of tzarchei rechiva. It's part of the requirements, the melachas that are necessary to do for riding. Shehi tiru kishetzarech lirkav l'tzarech hamayid oilatayil. And we said that your whatever malacha you need to do to facilitate your rechiva, your riding, if it's l'tzarech hamayid, you're allowed to do. So, again over here, the same way you're allowed to go ahead and you're allowed to trim the hooves of the animal to facilitate your riding, you're allowed to card and comb down the animal to facilitate your riding. And not only that, continues the Chavetz Chaim, v'ayin b'bach, he sends you to the Bach, da'afilu b'masreg shemashayir nimin, even if you're using a comb that's going to pull out hairs. The b'yom tov aser, which you're not allowed to do on Yom Tov proper, mishum psik reisha, because that's a malacha. Pulling hair off of the animal is the melachah of geizes. And if you're using an iron comb to comb the animal, then it's a psik reisha that you're going to pull out hair. So this is a melachah that you're doing on Chol HaMoed. You're not allowed to do it on Yom Tov proper. On Chol HaMoed, you're allowed to do it, but Chol HaMoed shari. It's mutter on Chol HaMoed. Why is it mutter on Chol HaMoed? The reason it's mutter on Chol HaMoed is because it's just like trimming the hooves. This is called tzarchei rechiva. This is one of the requirements. Now, why is this tzarchei rechiva? You want to tell me that trimming the hooves is tzarchei rechiva? That's tzarchei rechiva because the animal is either not going to be able to find his proper balance, or there's going to be tsar balachayim and the animal's not going to want to ride. He's not going to want to go. But over here, to polish the horse, that's tzarchei rechiva? So the Aruch HaShulchan's lashon, the Aruch HaShulchan says, mutter lisroi kasus, you're allowed to comb the horse, kedei liyapaisai, in order to make it pretty. Dezehu tainug, because that is a tainug, it's a pleasure for the rider. You don't want to ride a dumpy horse. You're allowed to ride the horse on Chol HaMoed, and you're not comfortable riding a dumpy horse. If you're not comfortable riding a dumpy horse, then it's considered tzarech ha'adam. It's your need, and it's a tzarech ha'moed in order for you to comb the horse. So it's mutter, even if it involves melachah. So are you allowed to give your car a car wash? Are you allowed to wash your car on Chol HaMoed? It would seem from here that you're allowed to wash your car on Chol HaMoed. You're allowed to drive your car, which is also, by the way, an interesting shaila. You know, driving a car involves the melachah of havara. You're burning fuel when you go drive the car. Are you only allowed to drive the car for a distinct tzarech hamayid? So I know that the Yeshiva Zatzal, Rav Moshe has a tshuva, and I believe they bring it down here in the Dirshu. Yes, it's in the middle of Dirshu, footnote number 3, about halfway down the paragraph. V'chein das agoin Rav Moshe Feinstein, shemuter linoid berechev. By the way, today is the shloshim for Rab David. The neshama should have aliyah. Moreinu or Rav David ben Reb Moshe. The neshama should have an aliyah. V'chein das again Reb Moshe Feinstein. Shemuter linoid berechev l'tzarech hamoed. You're allowed to drive a car if you have a tzarech hamoed. Av sheyesh bazeh malacha, even though you're doing malacha. V'haisif, and he adds, shegamim hoylech l'makom sheyachal leilech l'sham baraglov. Mikamakom muter l'ntzaya. You're allowed to drive on Chol HaMoed even if really you could walk. You're just going to shul. You're going to shul a block and a half away. You're tired. You want to drive. Are you allowed to drive? Are you doing this shalei l'tzarech? You know, we said, the Ramah said you're allowed to ride the horse bechinam, but that's because there's no melachah involved in riding a horse. But by driving a car, there is melachah involved. Are you allowed to do it if it's something, not bechinam? Bechinam, you're probably not allowed to do it. But are you allowed to do it if really you could walk? That's the Mechaber told us on Amud Aleph here in Sif Aleph. The Mechaber said you're allowed to do malacha if you can't walk. If you're taking a trip that you're not accustomed to doing by foot. But the Mishnah Berurah told us, remember, the Mishnah Berurah said in Sif Cotton, nice cotton bays, if it's a trip that you're accustomed to doing by walking, you're not allowed to do malacha. So could you drive, which is doing malacha, if it's a trip that you're accustomed to doing by walking? So the Rishiva Zatzal says yes. Mutar l'nsaya, you're allowed to drive. Even though you don't really need to drive. And you can't be matter the way you're matter doing malacha to facilitate riding. That's only when you're not accustomed to walking. But over here, if it's a trip that you're accustomed to walking, why are you allowed to do malacha? So the Rishiva Zatzal says, nowadays, we're all accustomed to driving. And we enjoy it more than walking. So therefore it's considered a tzarech, and you're allowed to do it even though it involves malacha. Va'oid, and furthermore, the Rishiva Zatzal says, Shahahefresh bein nesiya berechev lahalicha, gadol yoser me'ahefresh bein rechiva al sus lahalicha. There's a greater difference between driving and walking than riding a horse and walking. Olechein mutares hanihiga berechev av sheyesh ba malacha. So yes, you're allowed to drive, even if it's a trip. You don't have to say, really, I could walk to the grocery, why should I drive? No, you're allowed to drive. And even if it's a trip that you're accustomed doing by walking, the Rishiva Zatzal says you're allowed to drive. So you're allowed to drive on Chol HaMoed. My car is filthy. I don't want to drive a filthy car. I'm uncomfortable driving a filthy car. From this Sif Beis, it seems, the same way you're allowed to card and comb the horse, because it's a tainig, you want to have a nice shiny horse, you should also be allowed to wash the car. Nevertheless, I did see brought down from Paiskim in the Art Scroll has a book, a sefer on Hilchas Chol HaMoed, and they bring down from Paiskim that the Paiskim said that to go out and wash the car on Chol HaMoed is considered a zilzal Yom Tov. That's not something that's proper for Yom Tov. But I think even those Paiskim, that would be talking about you want to go outside on Chol HaMoed and you want to go get the sponge and the bucket and give your car a car wash. Maybe that's a zilzal Yom Tov. But to take the car to the car wash, l'chara, it would seem from this Sif Beis over here that there should be absolutely nothing wrong with it. How about to have your car repaired on Chol HaMoed? Could you take your car to the mechanic on Chol HaMoed? Could you yourself repair your car on Chol HaMoed? So we see over here in Sif Aleph that you're allowed to do malacha to facilitate riding your animal on Chol HaMoed if you're doing it for a tzarech hamoed. The question is that restricted to only malacha that's a maisa hedyet, or does it even apply to a maisa uman? We know that very often malacha that's mutter on Chol HaMoed, it's not a flat header. When malacha is mutter on Chol HaMoed, it's usually just a maisa hedyet. When we say that malacha is mutter on Chol HaMoed l'tzarech hamoed, it's a maisa hedyet that's mutter. It's not a maisa uman that's mutter, not professional work. So if you need a transmission changed, that's maisa uman for sure. Nowadays, I'm not sure. It could be even an oil change. It's considered a maisa uman. I've done oil changes myself many times. I did brakes myself too. But I think brakes would be considered a maisa uman. The vast majority of people don't do their own brakes. But the vast majority of people also don't do their own oil changes. So l'chayr would be a Maisa Uman. So if you look over here in the Dirshu in footnote number 2, they discuss this. It says here, V'tikun mechainis b'mayid, as far as repairing a car on Chol HaMoed. Kasav b'shal setshubas ar l'tzion, she'em tzarches harechev l'nesiya l'makom she'elav ein yichelus l'leches paraglav. If you need the car because you can't walk, it's a trip that you're not accustomed to doing by walking, and it's a tzarech hamoed, mutal l'sakin kol kilkel she'ira b'rechev afilu b'maisa uman. You could give the car into repair even if it's a maisa uman. V'chein das agoin runis karelis. The taimai, and their reasoning is shekishem she'tir tzarchei aguf. The same way tzarech ha'adam, the needs of a person, are mutter kigon kishute nashim, like the cosmetics for a woman, shenisbar b'ramban, shehutru af b'maisa uman, that they're mutter even if it's a maisa uman. V'chein legabe misha doilav gaga, if your roof has a leak, it's brought down b'sheba ritva shemutter l'saknei kedarka, you're allowed to fix your roof even if it's a maisa uman. Kevin she'ein adam dar b'diras rucha b'mayid, because you're not mechuyev to live in a leaky house, in a house that's not royal ledira on the mayid. Kamaikein hutru kol tzarchei aguf. So the tzarchei aguf, the needs of a person's body, are mutter on Chol HaMoed even if it's maisa uman. The kanche tzarch laleches lamakam rachak, if you need to travel, v'eni yochel laleches paraglav, mutter l'sakin l'tzarch zeh b'maisa uman. On the other hand, the das hagoyin Rabbi Yosef Shalom al Yashiv Satzal she'ein heter l'sakin mechanis b'mayid ayidei maisa uman. Rabbi Yashiv said you cannot have your car repaired with a maisa uman eladafka b'maisa hedyet. Elim ken yesh b'zeh mishum davar ha'avodim lo yisaknena b'mayid, unless it's going to be a davar ha'avod. If the car is going to get worse, if it's going to get damaged, if you don't repair it, then you could do even a maisa uman because it's a davar ha'avod. Okay. Well, I see we're going long, but let's go weiter. Sif Beis. I'm sorry, we did Sif Beis. Sif Gimel. Ein marbiin behema b'mayid. You're not allowed to mate animals on Yom Tov. Now, the act of mating an animal, it does not mean that you're not allowed to put a male and female animal together in a pen and let them do what they do. It means that you're not allowed to actually take the female animal and take the male animal and mount the male animal on the female animal. That's the act of being marbia. Ein marbiin behema b'mayid. You're not allowed to do that on the mayid. And this is something that ranchers and farmers that raise animals, there are animals that if you want to raise offspring of the animals, you have to mate them. They won't necessarily mate by themselves. So this is something that farmers and ranchers do. But you're not allowed to do this on the mayid. And the reason you're not allowed to do this on the mayid is because this is a tirchi yisera. This is a significant amount of exertion, and it's not l'tzarech hamoed, so it's not appropriate for Chol HaMoed. It's also on Chol HaMoed. Says the Mishnah Berurah in Ois Cotton Vav, ein marbin hainu she'ein oichsen habehema. You're not allowed to hold the female lahavi aleha zachar, to bring the male animal onto the female animal. Aval machnisen ledir zacharim unekevis biyachad v'roivin meyatzman. However, you are allowed to place them in a pen together, and if they mate, they mate. This prohibition that you can't actually mate them, that's only by most animals. Aval, chamoira, a female donkey, shetava, that desires the male. And now, the nature of a female donkey is that if you don't bring the female donkey a male donkey to mate with, when the female donkey is ready to mate, then titstanein v'teyaker. Then the female donkey will titstanein, it will become cold, v'teyaker, and it will no longer be willing to mate. In that case, mutar laharbia aleha, then it is indeed permissible to bring the male animal onto the female donkey to have a davar ha'ovid, because now you're dealing with a davar ha'ovid. Now is the opportunity to mate the animals. If you don't mate the animals now, the female donkey is not going to accept the male donkey anymore. So now it's a davar ha'ovid, and now even though this is a tirchi yisera, you're allowed to do this. But ubebirke Yosef mitzadid lahachmir gam bazeh, the Birkei Yosef says you should be stringent, and even in this case it should not be done. Ois Katan Zayin, B'Moed, you're not allowed to do this on Chol HaMoed. Dein Bazet Tzarech HaMoed, because there's no Tzarech HaMoed involved in this. V'loi Davar HaOved. And except for this case of the female donkey, this is not considered a Davar HaOved. So it's a Tircha Yisera, Shaloi Tzarech HaMoed, no Davar HaOved. It's also, you're not allowed to do it. Now the Chavetz Chaim does point out that U'B'Chayil Mutter. We know that there is a prohibition. You're not allowed to watch animals mate. And this is something, by the way, it's not well known. And I've gone to the zoo with the kids on Chol HaMoed, and there are times that you do see the animal. Look, animals will do what animals do. So sometimes the animals mate, and I've seen people point out, wow, look what the animals are doing. They might not understand really what the animals are doing. But really, there's an isser, there's a prohibition to watch animals mate. And the reason for that prohibition is because it might bring you to hirhurim rayim. It might, when a person thinks about what the animals are doing, he could start to think improper thoughts. So that's something that, generally speaking, you're not allowed to watch. So how is it that you're allowed to actually take the animals and mate them? So that's why the Chavetz Chaim says over here, the halacha is that you're allowed to do this you're not allowed to do this on the moed, but u'b'choil mutter. If it's not the moed, if it's not Chol HaMoed, on a regular weekday, you are allowed to mate the animals. Ve'ein bazeh mishum pritzusa. And there's no prohibition over here of doing something which is pritzusa, doing something which is promiscuous, doing something which could bring to hirhurim rayim. Because this is your livelihood. You're doing something, you're busy with your livelihood. This is not what you're thinking about now. You're not having those kind of thoughts. You're busy with your work. That's what you're doing. Okay, says the Mechaber Vayter here in Siv Gimel. So you're not ein marbian behema b'mayid. Aval, however, makizin ladam. You are allowed to do bloodletting from an animal on Chol HaMoed. Ve'ein moinin mimena kol refuah. And you don't have to refrain from doing any other type of refuah, any other type of healing on an animal on Chol HaMoed. Afilu im yesh ba melachah. Even if it involves melachah. And indeed, makizin ladam, the first example that the Mechaber gave here, to do bloodletting, that does involve melachah. You're making a chabura on the animal. And making a chabura on the animal would be a toilada of the melachah of sheichit. So that is a melachah. But you're allowed to be makiz dam, you're allowed to let blood from the animal, you're allowed to do any type of refuah on an animal, even if it involves malacha. And the Mishnah Berurah says in ches malacha da'araisa, even if it's malacha da'araisa, this is something that you're allowed to do. And the reason you're allowed to do this is because A, it's a davar avod. If your animal is sick and you don't do the refuah, your animal is going to die. That's a davar avod. You're going to take significant financial loss. And also this tsar balachayim. So you're allowed to do this on Chol HaMoed. Siv Daled. Ein moishivin tarnagolis al habeitzim legadel efreichim. If you are raising hens and the hen is laid an egg, and you want to take a hen and you want to put a hen on top of the eggs so that the hen should brood and it should eventually hatch the eggs. You want to raise little baby chicks. You are not allowed to take the hen and brood the hen on the eggs on Chol HaMoed. And again, the reason you're not allowed to do this is because of a tircha yisera shaloi l'tzarech hamoed. This is not a tircha that's appropriate for the moed. It's not a tzarech hamoed, and it's also not a davar avod, because you're not going to lose the eggs. You could sell the eggs. Fresh eggs sold here daily. So you could sell the eggs. You don't need to raise the chicks now. Now let's say you put the hen on the eggs before Yom Tov. Before Yom Tov you put the hen on the eggs. Ubarcha me'aleim. And now the hen went off of the eggs, which is something that will happen. Yachal lahachzira. You're allowed to go ahead and bring the hen back and return it to the eggs. And the reason you're allowed to do that is twofold. One is, once the hen was sitting on the eggs and began to brood on the eggs, now the eggs are already starting to turn. They're already becoming eggs that are going to raise chicks. And they start to lose their value as edible eggs. They become worth less. They're not as good as eggs that are used for food. So there's a little bit of a davar ovid over here. There's a certain amount of financial loss. Theoretically, you could still sell these eggs, but you're going to get less money for them. Also, once the hen was sitting on the eggs, to return the hen to the eggs is not the same level of tercha as originally placing the hen on the eggs. That we learned in the beginning of the sif. To originally put the hen on the eggs, that's a tercha yisera shaloi l'tzarech hamoed. But if it was sitting on the eggs and now you want to return it to the eggs, A, there's less of a tercha, B, there's a little bit of a hefsid moment involved, so that the mechaber says is mutter. Says the Ramah, aval osir lahishav acheres afilu meisa harishona. But what you cannot do is, let's say you had a hen that was sitting on the eggs and the hen died. Now you want to take another hen, a different hen, and you want to put that hen on the eggs. That you can't do, because that's the same level of tircha, that's the same tircha yisera as originally sitting the hen on the eggs. You're doing it for the first time. That's a tircha yisera that you're not allowed to do. And now let's finish the mechaber here. This heter that the mechaber gave you, that if a hen leaves the eggs, you're allowed to return the hen to the eggs. That's only if it's within 3 days of when the hen left the eggs. And there's two reasons for that. One reason is, I told you that the heter to return the hen to the eggs is based on two items. It's based on two factors. One factor is that once the hen was sitting on the eggs, it's less of a tercha to return it to the eggs. That's only true if it's within 3 days of when the hen bolted. If it's within 3 days of when the hen left the eggs. Once 3 days have passed, now it's just like putting the hen on the eggs for the first time. Like the Gemara says, within 3 days the hen still retains heat. And it's still ready to go sit down back on the eggs, so it's not a big deal to return it. After 3 days, the hen loses its heat. Now it doesn't want to go back to the eggs, so now it's a tercha yisera. Also, once 3 days have passed, we don't know if bringing the hens back to the eggs is even going to be efficacious. It might be too late. If the hen sat on the eggs and then left for 3 days, the eggs might be ruined. So you might not even be saving yourself any money here. There might not be any point at all in what you're doing. Let's take a look here at the Mishnah Berurah. Ois katan tes, ein moishivin. You're not allowed to sit down the hen on the eggs. De'ein Cho HaMoed v'loi davar ha'avid. This is not a Cho HaMoed, and it's not a davar ha'avid. You could sell the eggs the way they are. Sell them for fresh eggs, for food. Ois katan yud. If the hen was on the eggs and then left, you could return it. Says the Mishnah Berurah, midasasam ha'mechaber. From the way the mechaber wrote this in a blanket statement, mashma, the implication is, even if the hen has not sat on the eggs for 3 days yet, the hen only sat on the eggs for a day, and then it left, you're still allowed to bring the hen back. What's the significance of this? Because if the hen did not sit on the eggs for 3 days yet, the eggs are not ruined yet from being used as food eggs. You could still sell these eggs at a lower price. So right now, if the hen only sat on the eggs for a day and then ran away, you could still take those eggs and sell them cheap. Still in all, the mechaber is saying a blanket statement. If the hen was sitting on the eggs and then left, you could bring it back. It's still mutter. Because you are going to have to sell the eggs cheap, so you are going to take a small loss if you don't bring the hen back. And there isn't so much of a tercha involved in bringing the hen back once it was already sitting there. Vayin b'rosh v'torah, the Rosh and the Torah say, the muchach midaitam, it's apparent from their words, de'ein lahakil bazeh, that you should not be maker like this, rak lishitasam, only according to their opinion, the melachah Chol HaMoed hu midrabanan, that melachah and Chol HaMoed is always only in issa drabanan. Avalim nizbardu daraisa, but according to those who hold that melachah and Chol HaMoed is in issa daraisa, ein lahakil lahachzir, you shouldn't be makel to return a hen to the eggs, rakim yashva kvar alein shloisha yamim, unless the hen already sat on the eggs for 3 days, the oz ein abeitzim ruin klal la'achila, so now the eggs are totally ruined from being served as food. You can't sell them anymore as fresh eggs, she'eschilu lehisrakem, because they already started to firm up, to form chicks. So now if you don't put the hen back on, it's mamash a davar ovid, the eggs are ruined. Vim kain, and if so, based on this logic, According to what we said earlier, Bereish Siman Tavkuf Lamed Sivkat and Aleph, the Kama Rishayim Severin the melachas Chol HaMoed min HaTorah, that many Rishayim hold that melachah on Chol HaMoed is an Issa Daraisa. Ein lahakol bazeh. You shouldn't be lenient here. Kiyim kishiyesh lehefsid mekame beitzim. Unless you have 30 eggs, 50 eggs. So then, even though you're going to have to, you could still sell them for cheap. Still, it's a hefsid meruba. Daz yesh lismach lahakel ach toshlesh yam l'shivasa. Ois Katan Yud Aleph, the Mechaber said, if the hen died, you can't put a new hen on the eggs. Acheres afilu achar shlosh yamim liyeshivasa, the pasti legamri, even if a hen sat on the eggs for 3 days, so the eggs are totally ruined. Now the hen died, you're still not allowed to take a new hen and put a new hen on the eggs. Afilu achi aser. V'after chol davar ha'avid mutter b'chol HaMoed, even though this is mamish a davar ha'avid, and davar ha'avid is usually mutter on Chol HaMoed, yesh leimer de b'tercha yisera. Over here we are dealing with mamish a tercha yisera, because this hen never sat on the eggs, so now it's a real tercha yisera to get this hen to sit on the eggs. Ein heter af b'davar ha'avid. This is a very important Mishnah Berurah. He's telling you there's no heter of melachah by a davar ha'avid if it's a tercha yisera. V'ayin b'bir halacha. I've cut Yud Beis b'sai shloisha, the heter of the Mechaber, that you could take a hen and bring it back to the eggs. That's only, the Mechaber said, if it's within 3 days of when the hen left. Why? 2 factors. A, da'az mahani hachzara. First of all, then it will help to bring the hen back on, because it will now sit on the eggs and hatch the eggs. V'gamin tarich kol shekvar ozo chamimusa mimena, the ain't Torah kol kach lachzira, and it's not a tercha yisera to bring the hen back. But after 3 days, it's also, even if the eggs are going to be a total loss. Because it's a tercha yisera to bring the hen back after 3 days. And it's also possible that reseeding the hen on the eggs will no longer be efficacious. These eggs have been sitting without a hen on them for 3 days. The eggs are ruined. So again, there's 2 factors. One is a tercha yisera to get the hen to go back after 3 days, and it might be pointless. Once the eggs were sitting without a hen for 3 days, they may no longer be able to be hatched. Okay, thank you so much for joining me for limud HaTorah. The schos of limud HaTorah should be Megan and Gans Klal Yisrael, the Rebbeinu Shem Shesen, Yeshuas and Refuas and Parnasa to all those in need. We should be zeicher to the Bias Tzedek B'meherav Yameinu. Be well.